So today, as promised, I'm going to talk about right view, and then we'll meditate after that, and we'll have a discussion after meditation. So I know some of you won't be here for the whole thing, but I'm sure that you can catch up with questions later if you want. So right view is extremely important, of course. Without it, we can't make very much progress. We really can't awaken. It's really the view that we have of the way things actually work, the way things are, is what opens the heart, the mind to a true understanding of the Dhamma. It could be equated with true understanding of the Dhamma. If you look in even just like the middle length discourses, you see that right view is described in a number of different ways, but it always comes back to knowing the way that Dhamma actually is. The kind of the stock paragraph or phrases about right view, which there's a couple of layers to right view. There are two layers really to each of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And it's a mundane or kind of like your ordinary operation in the world kind of layer. And then there's the super mundane, which is the path factor as it is known, understood, embodied, permeating the mind of a fully enlightened being. And we want to be yeah, that could just be because of the internet. We'll see how this goes. So there's a stock phrase that you'll see in the suttas where the Buddha talks about a few of the things that are involved in right view on a sort of an ordinary level of, just being a human being in the world. And it goes like this. Now, this translation I'm going to read is by Bhante Sujato. And I find it more accessible a little than the one we've been used to most of the time, which was probably started with Venerable Nyanamoli some while back. So this one, it says, there's no meaning. This is wrong view. This is wrong view. And the opposite would be right view. Wrong view is that there's no meaning in giving sacrifice or offerings. So I'll explain this a little bit as I go. That statement is something that there were teachers at the time of the Buddha who said it doesn't matter how much you give, how much you look out for other people or do good things. It doesn't make any difference for your future. And of course, the Buddha said that was absolutely wrong. That to give, to be generous, to give what's difficult to give, sacrifice, to make offerings, to teachers and so on. This has great benefit. And the second statement in this paragraph is there's no fruit or result of good or bad deeds. And of course, it's along the same line. And some teachers then said, it doesn't matter if one of the ways they describe it, if you go up and down one bank of the river of the Ganges, just slaughtering people or you're on the other bank of the river of the Ganges and you're doing all these generous, helpful things. It doesn't make any difference. And of course, the Buddha was clear that it makes a huge difference. And I think for any of us, we can see that in our practice, in our lives, in just living. We see the results of these actions and attitudes. And then the third statement is there's no afterlife. To think that there's nothing that goes beyond this life is wrong view. There's no obligation to mother and father. So this is another thing that sometimes people think. And there was someone I know actually who said they didn't like the idea of having to think of their mother and father as any different from other people in terms of what they are obliged to, or that the right attitude is to repay them, to support them, to care for them. They didn't want to think of it in that way. But the Buddha would say this is wrong view, that our parents, even if they've done really horrible things or made great mistakes, even if they've been extremely unskillful, they're still your mother and father, and you have that obligation, that connection, that karmic connection with them. The next statement is no beings are reborn spontaneously. So for some people, this might be a little harder to take in. And what that means is that we pass away from human life and there might be a spontaneous reappearance in a heavenly realm or another realm. And the Buddha said, if you don't realize this, it's also wrong view. There's no ascetic or Brahmin who is well attained and practiced and who describes the afterlife after realizing it with their own insight. So for people to believe that no one can practice to a point of being able to have direct experience of what goes beyond this material realm, this would also be considered to be wrong view. So these are some of the things that we can, reflect upon and see where we are with them. And instead of thinking, oh, this is just something that comes from, the Buddha's culture or something like that, and we realize that this is what the Buddha knew based on his direct experience of reality. This is not, a theory coming from him. It's not just, absorbing some kind of cultural idea. And, we see these same ideas in other traditions, in other religious traditions, because there are going to be people who, of course, are not Buddhist, spiritual seekers, spiritual practitioners who have these direct experiences also. So that's kind of the basic kind of definition on, on a very material level. And I hope to talk a bit more about some of the issues that Westerners have with karma and rebirth, because that's actually what we're talking about here. And I'll get to more of that, I think, in a minute. There is a sutta. So there are a number of suttas in the middle length discourses that I'm referring to here. You can find that definition in number 41, for example. In number 51, the Buddha talks about some of these ideas, and for each one he says, since there actually is another world. So he talks about, well, if there is another world or there's not another world, if you do good things, it's going to be good for you in this life. But since there actually is another world, one who holds the view that there is another world has right view. So again, it comes back down to right view. In Sutta number 9, which is entitled Right View, we've been talking about it in Sutta studies. So those of you who've been coming on Wednesday nights know this in detail already. But here, Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, talks in detail about various ways that we can have right view. And one fundamental way is to know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, or what's wholesome and unwholesome. and then what the roots of unwholesome and wholesome behavior are. And here Venerable Sariputta uses these 10 things that are wholesome, and their opposites are unwholesome. And those 10 things show up in many, 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 many suttas, literally hundreds. And they are the first few precepts, the first 4 precepts. So it's to avoid killing living beings. This is part, knowing that this is the right thing to do is part of right view. To avoid killing living beings, to avoid taking anything that isn't given, to avoid sexual misconduct, to avoid lying. And then this list goes on into the other aspects of what we would also consider to be right speech, to avoid harsh speech, avoid malicious speech, avoid frivolous speech. And then it talks about letting go of longing, not having ill will, and having right view. Sounds a little circuitous, but these are the 10 things that are so important to be able to live by and to recognize as wholesome behavior and attitudes. And then he goes on to talk about other things that are right view. He said, when we recognize that what it is that sustains living beings. So now we start getting into a little bit of causation, like how do we keep going as a human being? You need food, you need contact, you need the ability to make choices mentally, mental volition, and you need consciousness. This is what the Buddha defined as, what actually maintains us, what we feed on, nutriment. And then Venerable Sariputta talks about the 4 Noble Truths as right view. He talks about the whole chain of dependent origination as right view. And he talks about recognizing that sensual desire, the desire to be being, and ignorance are the taints that need to be uprooted to make an end of suffering. And to know this is right view. So uprooting the underlying tendency to lust or sensual desire, to uproot the underlying tendency to aversion, uproot the underlying conceit, I am. These are all part of right view. So one of the things that Buddha emphasizes over and over again is that we need right view in order to wake up. And there's a passage in Sutta number 48 in the Middle Length Discourses where he talks about the things that we need to have in place to enter the stream. So that first level of awakening. And he talks about right view in there. He says one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, do I possess the character of a person who possesses right view? And what is the character of a person who possesses right view? That although a person might commit some kind of an offense, so he's saying this in monastic terms, like you maybe break a monastic rule in some way, you commit some kind of offense which has a means of rehabilitation laid down for it. So you can confess it, you can do some more self-reflection, or there's various ways that you can rehabilitate, come to understand what you did and not do it again. And then when a person commits that kind of an offense, they immediately confess it, reveal it, and disclose it, either to the teacher, here the teacher's in capital T, to the Buddha himself, or to wise companions in the holy life. And after having done that, then the person enters upon restraint in the future. So you admit it. And so in lay life, we can do the same thing. We do something wrong, we can admit it to our spiritual friend and talk about it, and then make the determination not to do it again. This is very much like, Ajahn Brahm always talks about the AFL method. You acknowledge, you forgive, and you learn. And this is the way a person with right view behaves. It's not like we try to ignore it or hide it. We don't have to talk to everybody about it. We can talk to someone who's trustworthy, who's actually going to help us look at how can I do this differently next time, and keeps it to themselves, right? So it's like the person with right view fears wrongdoing. We don't want to do things wrong. We know there are consequences. So that at that base of it, there's karma in action. And we know that, and therefore we don't want to do things that are unskillful, unwholesome. But we also know that there's a way for spiritual recovery. And actually there is, no matter what we do. Some of the really, really horrible things that people do, there's a list where the Buddha talks about, someone with right view would never take the life of their mother or their father or an arahant, or, you can get the idea. I mean, there are things that human beings do that are pretty horrible, and there's still a path of spiritual recovery. They can still gain right view in the future and recover from this experience. But when we have right view, we don't even want to do the little things wrong. We don't want to beat ourselves up for it either. That's also unskillful, but reveal it, disclose it to someone you trust, and make the determination to be restrained in the future. And then the Buddha uses this lovely image, just as a young tender infant lying prone at once draws back when he puts his hand or foot on a live coal. I mean, I don't know how many of you have open fires in your home, but if you can imagine, how fast we pull back, even a child, a baby. And this is how we should be when we have right view. And then he says, and in the next paragraph, he asks the same question: do I possess the character of a person who possesses right view? And here the answer is, although one may be active in various matters for his companions in the holy life, yet he has a keen regard for training in the higher mind, the higher virtue, the higher mind, and in higher wisdom. Just as a cow with a new calf watches her calf while she's grazing. And so this is true whether you're monastic or a lay person, that no matter what our other activities are, our duties are, of course, we want to, refine those to being things that are helpful to our peace of mind. But we still all have things we have to do, whether you're monastic or a lay person. And if we can do them still with the idea of the importance of the practice of developing higher virtue, developing higher mind in that meditation, training the mind, restraining the mind, and in higher wisdom, understanding the Dhamma and realizing the Dhamma. And then he has one more paragraph about right view. And the question here is, do I possess the strength of a person who possesses right view? And what is the strength of a person who possesses right view? Well, when the Dhamma is being proclaimed by the Tathagata. It's being taught. You listen, you give your attention, you engage it with your mind, you hear the Dhamma with eager ears. And I actually don't think I copied it here, but I think there's one more where it talks about a person with strength, the strength, possessing right view is one who lives according to the Dhamma. So do we have that desire to hear the Dhamma and then the desire to put it into practice? And this is the strength of one who has right view. And why is that? Because right view is really understanding the way things actually are. And if we do that, then we know about karma, we know about rebirth, we understand the real nature of sensual pleasures. These are some of the hard things in Buddhism for sort of the ordinary person to take in and understand and be willing to use. So a lot of times people have resistance to this idea, these ideas, and that's part of the being caught in the samsara. That's part of the wrong view that keeps us continuing to try to perfect what can't be perfected, to fix what's already broken and unfixable. Now, of course, there are things we can do to make things better. And that's a whole conversation in itself. How and when, and how much effort, all of that. But what we're talking about here is right view, seeing reality as it is. That's the first step. And the Buddha says, when someone has right view, it's impossible for that person to treat anything in this world as permanent. It's also impossible for a person with right view to see any, it says in the translation formation, it's any conditioned thing to be pleasurable. Which is another one that's really hard to take in, but it's right there in the suttas. It's impossible for anyone with right view to think of anything as self or belonging to self. So it's those three characteristics again, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, dukkha, and not self. And it's like, if we start to recognize that this is the nature of the world, this is the nature of everything in the world, including our own bodies, which are of the world, then the right view helps us to move beyond that to real security and happiness. That's the irony, or the paradox. It's not depressing, it's uplifting, it's freeing. And that requires direct experience to some degree. So we prepare ourselves for direct experience. We look for the experience that we can have in this life, like noticing the results of our actions when we do things in the unwholesome list, and we do things in the wholesome list, and we can see the results. So what do you do when you find yourself either uncertain or in doubt about some of these statements that the Buddha made so many times, in so many ways, about the nature of reality? And what do you do when, you may know teachers who are Buddhist teachers who teach a lot of good things and help people a lot, but they may have doubts themselves about some of these things, and they may give the impression that it's okay to kind of bypass them, not take it seriously, or some of the attitudes, especially in America, are around, I don't have to accept anything that I don't directly see for myself. And the attitude can be, I don't even have to try to understand it. It just doesn't matter. And then you look at what the Buddha taught, and he says it matters enormously. Like you can't really realize stream entry without this. It's not possible. And so it's something that I think is important to make the distinction between knowing directly for ourselves. It's not just either you know directly for yourself, or you just accept things on blind faith. It's real, or you reject whatever you don't know for yourself. There's that part where you can say, I don't know this yet myself, but I can hold this in a provisional way and look for how this actually works. So, even teachers, we don't know the whole Dhamma. You don't know the whole thing. We don't have the full right view until we're arahants. And if we only had arahants teaching, there wouldn't be very many teachers. But as a teacher in particular, it's important to say, I don't know this yet for myself, or even if you don't say that, you can say, this is what the Buddha said. Of course, it's important to know what the Buddha said. This is what the Buddha taught. And, I'm going to hold this as, something that I will learn, or I will see for myself. Because it depends on one's own trust in the Buddha. And that's something we need to work on ourselves bit by bit, recognizing what we can validate in our own experience that the Buddha taught. And then how much faith is there that the Buddha was correct, that he did get enlightened, that he did see through the whole nature of reality, even the expansion and contraction of the universe over eons, again and again. Big Bang Theory wasn't anything new to him. And, really taking things in that are shown to us by wise teachers to be right view, and looking for the evidence ourselves, because we do have to know it ourselves. The Dhamma is to be directly seen. That's how we really come to understand it. And right view, as we do understand more and more of it ourselves directly, the more free and happy we become. We're not so burdened by the world and the changes in the world. I just heard from a friend who's been a practitioner for a long time. She and her husband both got COVID, even though they're fully vaccinated, because there's a family member who's very opposed to vaccination and mask wearing and everything. And it turned out that family got infected, and then the other families in the extended family got infected. And she said even with vaccination, she had a really tough struggle with COVID. So she was warning that we should be careful, keep masking and social distancing, because it's still possible to get quite severely ill. And she said there was a moment, even though she was at home, that she realized she could die at any moment. And she said, but she felt completely at ease with that. ready to let go of this life. And she found that really comforting. And in a way, it's inspiring, that we can be that at peace with whatever comes. This is part of right view. This is a result of right view. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions, but I think first we'll meditate. So find a comfortable position. And let your body sink into the chair, cushion, bed, wherever you're sitting, sofa. Or if you're lying down, let your body relax into the surface you're resting on. It's good to have your spine be straight but relaxed. And tune into your breath, or if you have another meditation object that suits you better, tune into that. Staying present with your meditation object and allowing your mind to become gradually more quiet. Rest, happy and ease. In your mind and in your body. And then simply observe And if there are hindrances, increase your attention to your meditation object. And if it feels right, bring in some thoughts to uplift the mind, gladden the mind, and focus the mind. Maybe it's thoughts about something that really inspires you. Buddha, the Dhamma, the enlightened Sangha, maybe generosity, goodness, virtue, your own, and maybe some examples from others that you really admire. Just ways to turn the mind to being happy and at ease, content. And then as the mind becomes more still, observing what arises from that stillness. Until the sound of the bell. All right. I think that few people have joined us since we started. And also I want to welcome Art. He came in to join us here, and Forrest is here, and Andy is also here. They're not on the camera, and I won't spin it around because I don't think the satellite would approve, but Karen.
Hello. Um, yeah, what you're saying, I just wanted to say that I had an experience like that in meditation, and I think you can see it if you develop your mind, because I was having this trait that it was very unwholesome that it was arising in me, and I was trying to deal with it, but I was looking at it at a level like it's my fault. I created this tendency in myself. Where does it come from? I was just looking at this life and I wasn't really seeing anything. So I was very confused. And so I was in meditation a few weeks ago, quite a while ago now, actually. And I was just meditating around this subject. And all of a sudden, the realization came to me that, well, you didn't develop this in this lifetime. This was developed over many lifetimes. A story did come along with it, like what may have happened. I realized at that point the story actually isn't important about how it got created. What's important is how I'm dealing with it now. And by just looking at it through just this lifetime, I was getting nowhere. Once my view opened up and I saw myself as more of a continuum, totally changed the way I dealt with it. Now I was just looking at an object. It wasn't mine. It's not my fault. I didn't have a lot of guilt and anger around it anymore. I just had a determination to deal with it with the Buddhist teachings. And ever since then, it's been so much better. I just can't even explain it. I mean, I never really had that much
That's great,
difficulty.
Karen.
Yeah, I didn't really have a lot of difficulty embracing past lives. It's not a difficulty for me, but I do feel like if you just keep at it, these insights come. And the more that you embrace it, especially with all these identity issues going on in the world right now, if you don't just see myself as a heterosexual white woman, I'm like, I've been it all. I've been man, woman, black, white, gay, hetero. You've been it all. So I don't identify so strongly with this life anymore. And by doing that, I think I've become a way more open minded person than I used to be. So I think there's huge benefit in
Thank you,
embracing,
Karen. That's beautiful.
even if you just take it as a
Yeah.
hypothesis when you're working through your problems.
Mm-hmm.
Teacher that emphasizes that a lot. Just use it as a hypothesis, even if you don't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. It makes sense. It's good to give yourself the time and space to be present with the feelings. You don't have to be thinking about it all the time or anything, but to the the most effective way to do that is to notice where they arise. They present themselves in your body and feel that. And it's completely understandable, natural that when someone we care about is about to leave this life, that we feel that sense of loss, and we're going to miss them being here. But it's also useful to think about the fact that there are many lifetimes, and each of us has someplace we're going, and there we don't know what anyone's path is, um, but there will be more. And the best thing to do is to really hold the wish and the intention for that to be a really good thing for her. It doesn't completely, you know, um, it's not for the point of removing our own kind of suffering around it. It's good to be present with that, um, and trust that she's a good person and there's going to be a good continuation. Um, And then, also to really trust coming, it's like, it's okay to come and go. That's part of what is natural to the way things are. The more we see that, the less difficult it is for people to come and go in our life, and for us to go. So turning towards it is always the way to find freedom and relief. But you don't have to do it all at once, and you don't have to be bearing down on it. Just let it arise naturally and be present with those feelings. Let them roll through the body. Don't hold it back. Unless you're in a situation where you can't, and then later come back to it and be present with what's there. We don't have to fuel the feelings by thinking things that make them bigger. Using our mind to reflect on goodness and our confidence in the Dhamma is helpful.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And if you ever want to talk, you can get in touch with us too. Yeah. Lisa?
Okay, it's really helpful for me to hear all of the detailed explanations, different explanations you gave about right view, and but I have to come back to it's still the issue of rebirth is still a stickler for me. And I took your class in the summer on self and no self, and you gave kind of in response to a question about it, you gave kind of a different interpretation of rebirth as being the continuation of tendencies, or especially the toxic or unwholesome ones, beyond your lifetime. And to me, that makes perfect sense. But I think my strong reactions to hearing rebirth being a part of Buddhism is because it seems like such hard work to try to let go of the conceit of self, and that's so important in this process. But the way a very common interpretation of rebirth is like a continuation of self. It sounds like it to me, like myself is going to pop up again in another being. So could you say something about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, because the Buddha would straight away say that's wrong view. He was really clear that there's no self here in these 5 khandhas, and they're all gonna kind of fall apart, except that there is something that continues, and those habit patterns and even our talents and things, but it's not a self, it's not a identity, it's not me. And the more we understand that, like you said, that idea that those, it's not just the unwholesome things, it's the wholesome things as well that continue, and it's an understandable thing when a small child sits down and plays a symphony at the piano without any instruction. They've been doing this over and over. There's a man that many of us have heard of who's Sri Lankan, and when he was a small child, he was chanting these long suttas. We just listened to one of the recordings recently, and it's just absolutely clear Pali chanting these long suttas, and he's just a little child. And the experts in Pali say that it's a version of Pali that hasn't even been used for hundreds of years. There are many, many, many stories of people remembering their past lives, but it's not like a self. It's not a self. It's not an identity. It's a collection of unfinished business that keeps going. That desire to play the piano again, that pushes you into the next life or something else. The sooner we can realize that it's not about me, it's not a me, it's not an identity, the more likely we will be able to hold right view. And I'm glad you brought it up, because when that starts feeling like, oh, I'm going to get reborn and I want this or that. Now, think of it as wishing it for someone else, the next one who's going to take the baton. I really like the way one of the people who often comes to our sessions said that, she has this really, really wonderful life. Has had many, many good things in her life, and she feels like she's got a lot of gratitude for the living beings who came before, who did good things, so that this could be the case. And now she wants to make sure she doesn't drop the ball. So it's a much better way to think of it. Thank you. Nicholas.
Hello. With this topic of rebirth, sort of remind me a little bit what you were talking about, line 5 with the Kalama Sutta. So I remembered, like, at the end of that sutta, there was something about this sort of questions, like if what happened after death, if there any consequence regarding our actions. And so we just said something about like this 4 assurance or something like that. Can't remember what's the name, but he just sort of said that, okay, if you don't think there's something after death or any consequence for your actions, at least you know that when you follow like a virtuous life, you can at least have this assurance that you're gonna feel at ease, that you're not going to feel remorse. And I think that's like also in another sutta, one of the fruits of leading a virtuous life, that it helps you to have this anxiety and this worry and this remorse, just being a good person. And and it also reminds me a little bit of the sutta about this arrow, that this person was shot with an arrow, and there was a doctor or someone who can help him get the arrow out of his body, but he refused to get the arrow out of his body until he knew who was the person who shot him. So he knew what was the name of the person, what was the
Right.
who was involved. And it just sort of made me feel like maybe rebirth is not such an important thing in Buddhism, but it's something that whenever like the realization comes, whenever you can experience it yourself, you will know. But perhaps it's not as important as we think. However, like when it comes to rebirth, something that helps me to understand why good things happen to bad people and what bad things happen to good people. Because sometimes I feel like it's really unfair. I'm feeling like the only explanation is that maybe in a previous life they were really good people, or maybe in a previous life they were really bad people. And instead of like give me a sense of justice, because otherwise I would just feel like life is just unfair. But I'm not sure like if that's right or not, but so it helps me a little bit.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. One is that a lot of the times we think the things that we think are bad, like accidents, illness, dying at whatever an age that we feel is too soon or something like that, or even things being lost or broken or whatever, or stolen. These are actually things that can happen to anyone just by the fact that we're born as human beings. We can remember that everything in this life is impermanent, and that's just its nature. It doesn't mean necessarily that you did something bad to create this. Now, that could be the case, but it's not the right way to think about karma. The way to think about it is looking at what we're doing and how our future, the results that come from what we're doing. Like you said, there is, you might see a kind of perfect justice in that way. But it's also the case that we're human beings. We have a fragile body. All kinds of things can happen to it. It's like, I think it was someone told me that Ajahn Suchart, someone asked if someone got COVID because of their karma. And he said, no, they got COVID because they were born as a human being. You know, it's like, this is part of natural causes that occur. And the Buddha lists a bunch of things like that. This is just kind of the kind of stuff that happens when you're a human being. The idea of the kalamas is true, I think, but we have to remember that the kalamas were not the Buddha's disciples. They were just some people who were very confused, who had been hearing from lots of different teachers. And so he's trying to help them just tune into what they know is right and wrong. But he wasn't really expecting them to understand the Dhamma in total. So unless we want to keep ourselves in that category, we should look farther, more deeply into the other things that the Buddha also says about understanding karma and rebirth. And it's not that it is important, but not something to take blindly, but to investigate, because we want to continue to align ourselves with right view, to understand what it means to have right view, and to continue to investigate that, open ourselves to it, continue practicing so that our mind develops and we can see for ourselves. And that's really important. And so, you know, all these things that we may feel like, oh, I don't know if I agree with that. First check to see if, you know, the Buddha actually said it. The way to tell is the Pali Canon's pretty reliable. And then the things that are repeated over and over again in different ways, in different places, that's even more reliable. Because of course, it's been 2,500 years. A few little things that don't sound like they fit with what the Buddha said otherwise, you can pretty much assume that that was probably a change that happened in 2,500 years. But something like this, where the Buddha talks about it in different ways, from different perspectives, and it's consistent, it's important to really pay attention to it. And, you know, this isn't about beating ourselves up. This is about really trying to understand, and what should develop is more kindness and compassion and happiness and freedom as we understand. If that's not the direction you're going, you should consult someone who has experience and really be kind to yourselves and cherish this opportunity of being in contact with the Dhamma and benefit from it. So I think we should close. It's a little after time. I don't want to keep you too long. I hope you have a great day. Joyce, please go ahead.
So just quickly, I just want to check to see if anyone who shared would prefer not to have their share included on the recording. And Jill has already left, so.
Yes,
Ben,
please edit me out.
Would
That
you
would be
rather
awesome.
not edit you out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
sure.
edit. Now, who was that? Who was that? It was Ben?
That was
Ben. Yep.
Ben, edit out. Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing. We want people to feel free to share, and also just, you know, include your bit if you wish. Okay, thanks everybody. Next week we'll plan to talk about right intention. All right. Take care.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Ayya.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.
Talk to you later, Linda.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.